All right, guys, welcome to day 4 of the 21 Convention 2010. This is it, and it's going to go by faster than you can ever imagine, and we'll be out of here, and we'll see you in a year. So I thank you guys for coming. Appreciate it big time. Our first speaker today is Bill DeSimone. I got it right? Yes, always screw his name up. Very, very important speaker that I'm very honored to have here. Everything that Mark, Doug, and Drew have talked about is going to be further intensified and amplified by Bill in a very interesting way. And Bill is basically, I think, in my opinion, the world's leader in biomechanics as it relates to exercise. What he's going to talk to you about today, no one else is talking about. Hence, Doug really hyped this guy up with good reason. He wrote a book also called Moment to Arm Exercise. Excellent book that I highly recommend. I have a copy myself. It's in my backpack. I need to get it signed. Awesome book. And he has a new one coming out that will also be really, really good. So here from New Jersey, Bill DeSimone, thank you for coming.
Thank you, man.
Yep.
All right, well, thank you, Anthony. Just to be clear, though, I have no academic background in biomechanics. So I'm not a surgeon, not a physical therapist, not an exercise physiologist. I'm a trainer. I've been training myself since 1970. I've been training clients since 1983. I've been certified by NSCA and ACE a few times. But around 1998, I ruptured my own biceps and triceps training, and that led me to biomechanics books. So for the last dozen years or so, I've been working on taking the biomechanics material and relating it to what we do in a workout. So this is what I hope we get out of today. Basically why the biomechanics matter, as opposed to just wailing away on yourself in the course of a workout. First, though, let me just show you some of the stuff I learned from before the biomechanics. All right, this is Muscular Development Magazine, 1973. First magazine I bought off the newsstand. First article I read in it talked about a Pennsylvania man found dead in his basement on his bench press. He obviously missed the lift, hit his chest, the bar rolled onto his throat, choked him to death. Right? Well, welcome to weight training. So later on when I talk about rare catastrophic injuries, that's the type of thing I'm talking about. This was one of the first trade paperbacks on exercise. And if you note the groovy mustache and the exquisite form displayed in the squat exercise. So that's kind of the caliber of instruction that was out there. Then, of course, please tell me you know who this is. Okay? All right, thank you. Thank you. I did this at an NSCA conference once, and people had no idea who this was. This was, you know, what muscle and fitness came from, muscle builder power. And as you can tell from the picture on the right, mind-blowing calves. The calves are certainly the first thing that jump out at you in that picture, right? All right. And then one of his contemporaries, please tell me you know who this is. Okay, thank you. Again, I did this at an NSCA conference once. It was chiropractors and therapists, and they said, "Oh, what happened to his skin?" And I'm like, "This night, it's the Eric Bana Hulk movie had just come out." I said, "Are you serious?" So that was Lou Ferrigno, 25 years apart, and he still looks pretty close. Aside from the green, he still looks like in that kind of shape today. The other thing we had, you had the magazines on the newsstand, and then you had the courses that they would sell in the back of the magazines. So this was like a comic book. It had a staple in it, and it was just folded over. And that's not the printing. That's not font. That's typewriting. Because if you ran your finger across it, it would smudge. So this was Frank Zane, another guy in pretty good shape still today. And near and dear to HIT guys, this is Mike Mentzer from '76 and a little bit later. In the area of exercise, he had his own niche at the end, but his real role was to kind of bridge the bodybuilders with Arthur Jones. So Jones wasn't really bodybuilding minded, but he developed Nautilus and Med-X machines. On the right is the original Nautilus machine from DeLand, Florida. And then this is some of the mainstream stuff that came out Education of a Bodybuilder and 3 More Reps. And if you notice in the top, this is from a George Butler book on Arnold. And if you notice above his head in the reflection, it says Mensur is coming. Because at the time, even though Arnold obviously went on to much bigger things and Mensur didn't, at the time, Arnold thought Mensur was his top competition, not only in the sport, but in terms of his appeal to the general public. So that's why the Mensur is coming sign on top of the mirror. Now, one thing about this material, the bodybuilding material at the time, there was absolutely no biomechanics in it whatsoever. I mean, it wasn't even wrong. It was so far off. It might have reflected what they actually did, so it wasn't quite fiction, but the rationale behind it was somewhere between wishful thinking and magic. But it was very inspiring at the time. So this is the best shape I could get in around 1996. Notice the intact biceps and triceps. This was after rupturing the biceps. Notice the divot, very subtly indicated by the fluorescent green circle. And the left tricep is intact. The right side, there's no medial head. So the head of the tricep closest to my body is pretty much gone at this point. So, so in between those 2 pictures, I had ruptured my own biceps and triceps. And when I looked into the injury, what came out of the not the muscle material, but the medical material, is that was a very common injury for people who are 60 years old, for males around 60 years old. But I was 40 at the time. So my conclusion was the only thing I had done to accelerate the wear and tear on my shoulders was weight training in general, but specifically using a really extreme range of motion. So when they healed and I went back to working out, I noticed that in some exercises, I lost no strength whatsoever. I could bench press, I could chin up, I could do a standing curl with the same weight, same intensity as before. Some exercises I couldn't even get into position. I would try to do a concentration curl, I would try to do a 1-arm triceps, and I couldn't even, my arm would be shaking all over the place. I had no control over it. So I put all the exercise books aside and robbed a physical therapist friend of mine's biomechanics textbooks. So these are the academic definitions of biomechanics. For me, I look at it as looking at how the bones and muscles of the spine handle load, how the shapes and connections at your joints affect movement, and how the muscles apply and resist force through the limbs. But in the context of working out over a lifetime. You know, in fairness to the bodybuilding material, if you take it at face value, the point of that stuff was to train for a photo shoot or for a contest. It was never intended to be something you did for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. So 35 years or so ago, as the mainstream population became more interested in exercise, the bodybuilders were the ones who knew the way around a weight room. So everyone tried to train like a bodybuilder. And now obviously if you're an executive or a homemaker or a student athlete, that level of time and effort and discomfort is completely inappropriate. So, you know, we called it personal training, but the idea came up of tailoring the exercise program to the person or what the person needed the exercise program for. And nowadays they call that functional training. So even though functional training as a whole has kind of gone off the rails a little bit, as has personal training, the idea of training for a purpose, not just spending hours in the gym, took hold. So this leads to our first question. Just a quick show of hands here. Who thinks a barbell squat is more functional than a leg press? Who are the barbell squat fans? Oh, so what do we got here? So about half. So I guess everybody else thinks the leg press is more functional? Undecided. Get out of here. A quick snap judgment. Which is more functional, squat or bench press? Leg press. Go ahead. Well, that's a good question. Which is a better exercise? Well, it's okay. It's okay because I'm not going to answer that. We're just going to explore it. Okay. So, what does functional mean? That's a good question. And that right now in the exercise arena, defining functional training is an issue because it's used so broadly. It covers bodyweight exercises, apparatus, vibration machines, cable machines, that kettlebells. That you're right. It's become almost meaningless. But in raw terms, function is relating to its purpose, relating to its design.
I played rugby back in college. Really quickly, I played rugby back in college, and for us, functional was what was going to help us play our sport better and be better at it. And for us, the big two were always squats, clean and jerks. Like, we preach those, and I mean, we were probably wrong, I'm guessing, but I'm looking forward to the exploration of it. But that's what functional meant for our purposes.
Okay, fair enough. So here we go. All right, so we're going to look at the bones and muscles involved here. Okay, so we're going to start the midsection with the pelvis and work our way down. So pelvis is obviously fairly solid and thick, right? One immovable joint, but it's a solid block of bone. On top of femurs, strongest bones in the body, right? Thick, strong beams, which are on top of more beams, the tibia and the fibula, okay? Which form, with the feet, form a tripod. Okay, so you have basically below the knee, you have a tripod, you have the two shin bones plus the foot. Above the knee, you have the long beam of the femur resting on top of a solid block of bone, the pelvis. And when we look at the muscles involved in moving those bones, you've got the glutes connecting the pelvis to the femur, right? Obviously a big muscle. We've got three hamstrings, a decent-sized muscle connecting the pelvis to the lower leg. And then another big set of muscles, the quads, connecting pelvis and the femur to the lower leg. So below the waist, we've got big bones, big muscles, relatively few attachments pulling in few directions. Basically, straighten the hip and straighten the knee. All right, now we're going to look above the waist. So we have three sections of vertebrae. You have the lumbar, thoracic, and cervical. 5 lumbar vertebrae. Okay? These are the biggest, thickest vertebrae at the bottom of your spine. And they interlock so they don't rotate or bend to the side well. And the function of that stability and of that size is to support all the weight above it. Sitting on top of the lumbar are the thoracic. And if you look carefully, you can see that the lowermost bones of the thoracic, the ones just on top of the lumbar, are bigger, and as you move towards the head, the bones get smaller. All right? That's because as you move towards the head, it's supporting less and less of a load. Also, notice the processes sticking out the back of the thoracic, literally the spines. They're sticking out because the thoracic isn't as locked together as the lumbar. The thoracic is designed to rotate, and those spines basically stop the rotation after about 5 degrees each or so. Now, not shown here is the cervical vertebrae, okay, but as you might guess, they're smaller than the thoracic and have less restrictions on rotation because, again, they're only supporting the weight of the head. So if we're just looking at the bones, bigger bones on the bottom, a descending load at the top, you're looking at a pyramid. You're looking at a structure that's designed to support less weight as you move towards the top. All right, so now starting from the bones, we're going to work our way out muscle-wise. The deepest layer connecting the spine are the rotators, which connect each vertebrae to the next horizontally. And each one is very short, as is the next layer above that, the multifidus, which connects each vertebrae diagonally to the one above it. So this is the shortest, the multifidus is slightly longer, but the short length suggests their function is to hold together, hold statically, not to twist the spine, which would go with the thoracic. You do need to be able to twist because the ribs are attached to the thoracic. So you do need more general mobility up around the ribs. But the lumbar has to support the weight of your upper body. The next layers up, semispinalis and erectus spinae, they're a little bit longer, more superficial. Semispinalis connects the thoracic to the points above it. Erectus spinae connects the lumbar and lower thoracic with the points above that. So now the most superficial muscles, which are longer, do account for more of the range of motion around the spine. All right, so let's get back to the original question here. Below the waist, big bones, big muscles, few attachments, few directions. Above the waist, many bones in a pyramid structure, many small muscles. Okay, so you have basically a mobile pyramid. What happens when you put a barbell on top of your shoulders? What happens to that pyramid structure? Nobody would design a tabletop with a pyramid base and put the tabletop on top of the pyramid. If your structure is designed to support less load towards the top, you wouldn't do that and then be shocked when it didn't work. Okay? The leg press, on the other hand, has you move big weight with the big bones and big muscles of your body. Also with the squat, now to a degree your back muscles will get stronger if you train with the barbell on your back, all right? But don't forget there's also discs in between the vertebrae and there are nerves coming through there. So by adding, as your hips and legs get stronger and you're adding more weight to that bar, you're loading the spine in a bunch of different ways, not just muscularly. Are you with me so far? Do you see where I'm going with this? Somehow barbell squats in the muscle media are considered more functional than a leg press. But the question is, functional for what? If you're a power lifter and you have to squat, if that's your competition, yes, you have to squat. You have to use a barbell squat because it's very specific. But if you're an athlete and you're trying to train the muscles of your lower body, the bar on the shoulders completely inverts the function of the spine. Questions? Complaints? Yes, sir?
What if you're training for a vertical jump? Is this still more functional to use a leg press?
Whether you're training for a vertical jump, rugby, MMA, your spine is your spine, right? So, you know, a vertical jump, think about what's happening here. The muscles of your spine are just supporting descending weight as it moves up. So matching a barbell squat with that particular sport, again, you've inverted the demands. You've inverted what the body has to do. I realize what I'm saying goes completely counter to sports coaching, muscle media, what have you. Okay, but your spine is your spine. I mean, regardless of your sport. So, as far as a barbell squat goes, okay, some of the negatives would be the strain on the back muscles and the discs of the actual spine. A regular squat, getting to the point you make though, is without the barbell, the squatting motion is more functional. Your spine muscles can support the lighter load at the top of the head. Let me get to here. Mechanically, the sticking point of a barbell squat happens at about the joint angle for peak torque for your glutes and your quads. So I'll explain more about peak torque in a minute, but it does vary the resistance appropriately, a regular freehand squat. So the issue becomes, how do you make it more challenging with a freehand squat? Now some other joint issues with the squat. We'll go into the squat a little bit more. If you notice, if you squat down too low, the curve in your lower back flattens out. Even though the spine is curved overall, with the normal spine curves, the discs in between the pressure is flat on them. If you flatten the curve, or you overbend it, or you twist the spine, now one side of the disc gets impinged, the other side herniates or like blows out. You can get away with that, once, twice, 10 years, 20 years, but in time, that pinching and blowing out causes problems with your back. So when you squat, you should, if you're going to use the squat as an exercise, you should only go so low as you can maintain the curves in your back. So you should hold the curves in your back steady, and as you descend, and if someone's watching you, or if you can tell, when your back curve flattens, that's the bottom. If you want to preserve over time the health of your back. The other joint to be concerned about is the knee. Now the patella in your knee. You can live without a patella, okay? Patellas get crushed, they get injured. All that means is your quads aren't as strong as with a patella. Because what the patella does is it keeps the line, it gives you an internal lever. It keeps the line of force from the quads away from the axis of the knee. So what happens is basically the patella deflects the force from the quads and the counter force from the shin. The lower you go in the squat though, the more pressure is on that patella. So think of it in terms of like a bow and arrow. When the string is straight, there's not much pressure on your fingers. The further out you pull it, you're feeling more tension on it. And that's what's happening at the patella. If you go deeper into the squat, this picture yet again, now it's no longer a bow and arrow, now it's a crowbar. So now what's happening is, if you're familiar with a crowbar, you have a long end and you have your short business end. And you slip the short business end under the load and you crank as far away on the handle as you can. When you get too deep in the squat, the femur is the crowbar, where your calf hits the hamstring is the axis, and the business end is your knee. So if you drop this low, you're in effect trying to crowbar your knee apart. Now, leg press, you can still run into the same problems. This is a 45-degree angle leg press. That's a horizontal leg press. In the older days, leg presses were built on a vertical rack. So you'd be lying on your back on the floor and pushing the weights straight up. That made it very difficult to maintain the curves in your lower back. So if you're lying on your back and your feet are pushing back at you, the curve in your lower back flattened out. So it defeated the purpose of using a leg press. If the purpose was to relieve some of the pressure on your back, well, now you're back to putting pressure on your back again. It's a little bit easier with the 45-degree leg press. And some of them today, for instance, the nitro leg press has the curves built into the seat pad. Now with the leg press, most of them you can adjust the seat back, okay? So maybe not clear, but in this case, the seat back is pushed up to 90 degrees. So at the bottom, the person's knees are jammed into their armpits. And in the second one, the seat back is as reclined as the machine allows. Now here's what happens. The peak torque for the glutes, the joint angle where the glutes are biomechanically strongest, is at about 70 degrees of flexion. So right about here. If you crank the seat back of the leg press as high as it can go, well, your quads basically, your femurs reach about 90 degrees of flexion and the exercise is over because you can lock out. So even though you feel it a lot in your backside, you're really not coming near challenging the strength of the glutes, because where the glutes are strongest, there's no more exercise. You've locked out. If you recline the seat back as far as you can so that your finished position looks more like a standing up squat, now you're going to challenge the glutes and your quads. It won't just be a quad exercise. All right, let's go. Before we move on to full range of motion, any discussion, comment on leg press and the squats? Yes, sir. Hold it, wait.
So, Glassman, CrossFit, he talked a lot about how the reasons the leg press isn't as functional, whatever that may mean, jargon terms, has to do with the way that the spine isn't mobilized properly. And I wonder if what he's talking about is the way the positioning in a seated position, that's not really a natural form for the spine to be bearing loads anyway, or?
Was this Mark talking? Mark Sisson talking about?
No, Greg Glassman, founder of CrossFit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, there might be something to that. Okay, it might be that the most functional way of training your lower body might be with a form of bodyweight squat. Okay, because now you are mobilizing everything. Issue becomes, how do you make it harder? Obviously, the CrossFit answer is more and more reps faster and faster, but that's got complications also. If a nitro leg press isn't available, I'll lean towards one-legged type movements. If anyone wants to demonstrate, I'll put somebody through a quick leg exercises. But for instance, a split squat with one leg in front of the other, or a, quote, reverse lunge. I know Mark Sisson's a big fan of walking lunges with weights in his hands. So all of those, arguably, if you want to argue which is more functional, might be more so than the squat or the barbell squat or the leg press. If the question is, though, I want to train my legs to get as big or as strong as possible, then any body weight exercise is it's not going to line up. You know, what do you have to do? 100 body weight squats to and if you do 100 body weight squats, yes, 101 might be impossible, but now you're working on endurance. Okay, you're not really lifting heavy for fast twitch fibers or to challenge the strength, the force capability of the muscle. So the question really is, why is the person training? You know, truly functional training, frankly, is to do with sport. Forget the weight room, forget artificial leg, forget the classes. If you're a dancer, if you're a martial artist, if you're an athlete, practice your sport. You can't get much more specific than that. But it's an inefficient way of getting stronger, bigger muscles. Answer your question?
Yeah, I didn't know if there's a real answer. It seems like it's a point of contention. Oh, I mean, I guess what I see you're saying is that leg press is probably safer than a heavy bodyweight squat.
Well, I would say leg press is definitely safer than a barbell squat. Okay. If you are going, let me try to put this in context. If you are going to do a barbell squat, there are things you can do to make it less dangerous. If you're not married to the barbell squat, then a leg press, and you still want to train heavy for your lower body, a leg press is probably, with some tweaks, is going to be next safest, or is going to be safer. And if you're more concerned with the body working as a unit, then some kind of body weight squat or body weight lunge is probably the most relevant. but you're not going to get as strong doing body weight squats and lunges as you are with any kind of weight. So if I was selling body weight only classes, I would have that position also. It depends, again, it depends what the question, it depends why the person's training, really.
Bill, it almost sounds to me like there's no perfect answer, and it comes down to what your goals are and what you want to do.
Right.
Is that like what you're saying?
Right, and a lot of times these arguments, what's better, HIT versus bodybuilding versus functional training, it misses that first question. Why is the person exercising in the first place? Again, if you want to train heavy, putting a barbell on your back or doing some kind of body weight leg exercise is not the answer. You just can't. It's so much easier when people say, well, I just want to do bodybuilding. Okay, fine. But so as far as, whether, for instance, my daughter has danced for 15 years, okay? Wouldn't know a leg press if she tripped over it. But functionally, she's certainly not weak doing leaps and landing on one foot and doing all that's required of her activity. So it ultimately boils down to, why is the person training? Okay, so now the phrase full range of motion, it's gotten less prominent recently, but until functional training became the current buzzword, this was all over the place. This was on instruction cards. Every exercise article said, use a full range of motion. Every trainer felt obligated to say, use a full range of motion. Nautilus machines, Medix machines, every manufacturer that put an instruction card on a machine said, use a full range of motion. So the question is, was that real biomechanics or is it just a buzzword? So look at two aspects of this. One is muscle and one is joints. This is a standard graph of muscle force available in every biomechanics, kinesiology, exercise physiology textbook. And what it shows is, now length means to the right is a stretch, and as you come towards the left, you're moving towards a shorter length. And what it says is, when you're moving your muscle from stretched to fully contracted, the force your muscle generates increases up to a point and then decreases. And when you go the other way, when you're being pulled into a stretch, something else kicks in. The passive tension refers to the non-contracting elements of muscle fiber, so the actual structure of the muscle fiber, which is sort of like a defense. Like, if you miss a step, or if you have to block something like a punch, or if you catch something that's thrown at you suddenly and your muscles twitch back, especially if you're surprised, you're not voluntarily contracting, right? So the passive tension kicks in to protect the muscle. This is also where plyometrics comes in. So as you jump and you go into the landing, you're lengthening the muscle involuntarily, and so that rebound adds to your conscious contraction. Now the issue with plyometrics, of course, would be you don't know where that top limit is. If you go to lift a weight, if it's too heavy, you know right away. If you're dropping the weight out of the bottom, it could be a weight you can handle, it could not be a weight you can handle, you have no way of knowing where that top limit is. But this is how muscle fiber, muscles intact, muscle fibers, this is how they act. There's favorable length for force, somewhere between fully stretched and fully contracted. Now, the thing with this curve, though, is this is literally an academic curve. Sorry about that. This is literally an academic curve. If you detach a muscle from a rabbit, a frog, a human, and you stretch it or you stimulate it to contract, those are the curves you get. When muscles are intact on your body, you have to look at torque curves. These are some of the technical terms from the graphs, just in case there's any ringers out here who want to test me if I really know what I'm talking about. Resting length, favorable length, active insufficiency is when a muscle is is positioned away from favorable length. Passive is when it's either stretched or when the opposing muscle is taut and it interferes with the active muscle. And tenodesis is when the muscle is so taut it shifts one of the joints to accommodate. Stuff like that, if you look at specific exercises, it's more, you can demonstrate it more. Now, one thing about the basic curve is the textbooks all say that at the extremes of motion, the body tends to avoid those positions in daily life. So you're not going to run against them. Except that daily life is, working out with weights is not daily life. So machine designs will put you into active insufficiency. Exotic, isolation exercises from the bodybuilding magazines put you into active insufficiency. So for instance, actually, let me just demonstrate active insufficiency for the quads. Can I have a subject here? Anybody, come on. So I want you to have a seat here, facing out. And now just put your hands behind you like you're on a leg extension machine. All right, and just straighten your knees out. Sit back a little bit. Okay, so just lean back. Okay, so with the back at his angle, he can lock out his knee. Okay, now I want to put your legs down. Lean forward as far as you can. Try to lock out your legs. Okay? Notice he can't lock his knees out. Keep trying. And as you come back, the knees lock out. All right? So you go into a gym, guy's got a brand new leg extension machine, he puts you on, you can't lock your knee out, he says something like, oh, look, your quads are strong, you really got to work out by personal training sessions. It might just be that the back angle on the machine is wrong. If the back angle on the leg extension is at 90 degrees, what happens is the quads where they attach at the hip and they attach at the knee, it's too short, and it puts you into active insufficiency. Thanks. So in daily, like in walking, for instance, your rectus is stretched over your hip and shortened over the knee so you don't run into it. But in something like a knee extension, if the back angle is wrong, you run right into it. And that applies to a lot of exercises. It applies to old pullover machines. It applies to dumbbell side raises. This is active insufficiency for the deltoids. Rowing, if you think you're doing it for your lats, this is peak torque for the lats is up here. Back here, the lats are too short to function. So since our movements, and a lot of times the movements on machines or bodybuilding type movements aren't really real life movements, this does come into play. What's more important, though, when we're talking about intact muscle, is muscle torque curves. So, moving left to right, you're going from a stretched bicep to a contracted. And what these curves show is for different speeds, this being no speed, isometric, this being the fastest speed, for different speeds, your biceps get stronger, peaks, and then the strength drops. If you notice, at any speed, the peak is between 70 and 90 degrees, which means at about a right angle at your elbow is where your biceps are strongest, which happens to be where a conventional standing curl is hardest. That's where the sticking point is. This is the torque curve for shoulder flexion, comparable to a reverse, like a bench press or reverse grip bench press. Okay. In flexion, your body is strongest with your elbows by your side, and as your elbows come up, it gets weaker. That kind of a bench press is harder. The sticking point is when the elbows are by your side, and as you lock out, it's less difficult. This is an example of a complete mismatch, where an exercise is mechanically hardest where your body is weakest. So for shoulder extension, meaning, say, the bottom of a chin-up, so you're starting here, and your arm's approaching you. A dumbbell pullover is exactly the opposite, okay? Dumbbell pullover, your lats are strongest in the top position, which is where you're locked out. As the weight moves overhead, your lats are getting weaker, but the exercise is getting harder. That exercise is particularly dangerous. We had a guy in a gym in New York once, takes the dumbbell off the rack, lies back on a bench, says, he's lying back, says, dumbbell's too light. Brings it back, gets a heavier dumbbell. Nope, still too light. Brings it back, comes back with the heavy dumbbell, says, okay, this is right, this is heavy. And as he comes back with it, now he can't stop it because the lever arm got bigger, dislocated both shoulders. Now, I told that story to Ellington Darden, and he said, why didn't you take the dumbbell off the floor? Well, that's a pretty simple answer. You're right. If you take the dumbbell off the floor, you're starting where the exercise is hardest, so if it's too heavy for you, you know right away and you just don't do it. This guy started where the exercise was the easiest, and it was a mess. So that's a complete mismatch. This one, the straight arm pull down with cables, matches it better. Again, when you're standing in front of a cable, here's where the exercise is hardest. It's also where your lats are about strongest. And then as your arms come towards you, the exercise gets easier, and that's where your lats are getting weaker, so it matches well. And one last one, this is a row. Rows, again, rows are hardest when your elbows are close to your body, but that's where your lats are weakest. So it's another mismatch. So now the point doesn't, ideally the exercise matches. So ideally, an exercise is mechanically hardest where your muscles are biomechanically strongest. Absent the ideal situation, you don't worry as much about training the full range of motion as training what I'll call the effective ranges of motion, or the strongest ranges of motion. Because if you do an exercise, for instance, that's too heavy for you here, where you're weakest, your muscles might burn and you might be breathing heavier and you might feel fatigue, but you haven't really challenged the force-producing capability of the muscle, which is theoretically what weight training is supposed to be about. If you do pick an exercise, for instance, let's say in knee extension, which is this one over here, if you pick an exercise and you only train the shortened position, you only do, say, quarter reps at the top, all you're doing is reducing the amount of weight you're working out with, because the curve never inverts. You'll never take a basic strength curve and turn it into a U shape by training the ends. It's just not how muscle science works. So this would have some implications for things like any of the various partial training techniques, partial rep training techniques, where what they used to call them burns in bodybuilding, where you're only doing a fraction of the motion. If you want to train for the sake of the muscle burning, okay, fine, but in terms of getting stronger or challenging what the muscle can do, you've got to be in the strong ranges of the movements. Any questions about the muscles in full range of motion? How the muscles act?
So if you were to do a partial rep at the strongest part of the motion, is that a good thing? Is that accomplishing a lot for for strength training?
Well, it's probably closer than, well, it's definitely closer than doing it in the weakest part of the motion. So, for instance, if you were to, it does beg the question, why use any range of motion at all, right? Why not just train at the one point where you're strongest? And that's a good question, right? I think practically the real answer is you don't really calibrate. Most of the equipment people train on isn't calibrated for speed. So you don't really know if we're going 50 degrees, 50 degrees a second. We don't really know the speed we're moving at. And since we don't know the speed, we don't really know where that peak joint angle is. We're going to know where it's about. So if you use some range of motion, you're probably going to cover it. Years ago, isokinetic machines were popular or were around, and you would set the speed. Well, in that case, you could match it. But with regular conventional weights and machines, you don't exactly know how fast you're going, so you don't exactly know where that peak joint angle is. But you're right, it would lead you to believe only train at that one joint angle. Anything else before we move on to the joints in full range of motion? Okay. Again, one of those things I put up to see if any ringers in the audience. If you train on machines, knee extension machine, pec deck, you'll see the instruction, line up the joint with the axis of the machine, okay? So single joint machines imply that all of your joints act like hinges. If you do kettlebell type classes or other kind of free weight, TRX, that type of stuff, and they have you loading your joints in a lot of different directions, that implies that your joints are all swivels, like they're all ball and socket. In biomechanics, the joints are blends of these 6 basic types. They're not pure hinges and they're not pure ball and socket. So for instance, with the knee, you really can't line up the axis of the knee with the machine axis. Because the knee, if the knee was a hinge, if the knee was a pure hinge, it would rotate this way. And that would line up with the machine axis. If the machine was a rolling joint, when you moved your shin, it would roll off. And if it was a sliding joint, it would slide this way. What happens with the knee is it's a rolling and sliding joint, so it rolls and slides in place. The axis in that far right corner, the axis changes depending on how far bent your knee is. So technically, you can't line up the axis of your knee with the machine because that axis is always moving. So now if we're looking at full range of motion with a knee extension, for instance, and you're really working at locking your knee out as far as it can go, the issue with that is there's a mechanism, the screw hole mechanism, terminal rotation. So for the middle of the knee range of motion, it does function like a hinge. At the end, the bones of the shin and the quad rotate on each other to lock. So the shin will rotate externally or the femur will rotate internally and it locks together. The point of that is so when you're standing up straight or you're walking, you're not using any muscular effort. Okay, there's a passive lock at the knee. So if you're on the leg extension machine and you're really diligently trying to lock your knee out against resistance, what's happening is you're taking this passive bony lock, you're loading an external weight on it, and you're applying great internal force to jam this bony lock into position that's designed to be a passive lock with your body weight standing upright. So your quads will burn as you're trying to lock the knee out, okay? But you're really just bringing on a lot of unnecessary joint stress for the sake of feeling the exercise. Practically what you do is you watch someone on a knee extension, and at the end of the motion you'll see what happens. Again, excuse me. What happens is if your knees are free to move, when you lock your knee out, the shin will rotate externally or your femur will rotate internally. When you're strapped in on a leg extension machine and you're trying to lock out, that movement still has to happen, so you'll see some shifting going on in the seat. The thing to do would be to watch, and as soon as the shifting starts, that's the end of the repetition. Because past that point, you're just trying to force that bony lock. Again, that's designed to be a passive lock. At the back end, that was for locking the knee out. As you're bending the knee, as you pull your knee more and more into flexion, again, the way the bones are shaped in the femur and the shin, your foot is going to move towards the center line. So if you squat, normally people's knees will go out. If you follow some of the old-time bodybuilding instruction where you're going to force your quads parallel or force them apart, you're just preventing or you're fighting this natural movement of the knee. So for all the muscles, but in particular for the knee extension, there's a muscular component to trying to use a full range of motion, and there's a joint component. Can I have before we move on, questions about the knee or in full range of motion? Go ahead.
I didn't get to hear everything about the knee. I was outside for a second, but with what you know about my knee and dislocating it almost half a dozen times throughout the past 8 years of my life and the problems I've had recently, the best way to work out my knee before getting an MRI and probably surgery on it, you think, is just keep doing a leg press? Perhaps? I'm not like a big fan of extensions, but what are you telling me? I should like stay away from them?
It sounds
Maybe.
like it. Again, not
Yeah.
knowing what's going on.
Yeah.
The knee extension, by definition, is just going to put a lot of pressure on your knee.
Yeah.
So,
Of course, when I was getting rehabbed at the clinic, when I heard it back in the day, that's exactly what they had me do.
yeah, well,
Yeah. What else
well,
is
you
new?
know, rehab isn't immune to different fads and vogues in terms of training. But you definitely wouldn't want the machine to push you into a stretch and to really overemphasize that finish position, again, because you're just fighting against your own bones.
Cool, thank you.
All right, so for overhead motion, can I have another subject to demonstrate? Any volunteer? Come on up, thanks. All right, so let's see. Everyone, just quickly, without thinking, raise your hand overhead. Just lift your arm up. Okay. Fortunately, you all did the right thing. Come on down. Notice nobody obviously led directly to the side, okay? And nobody forced their hand all the way in here and tried to come up this way. All right, so the first thing, turn your elbow out so your elbow's pointing out. Lead with the pinky. Try to lift up as far as you can go. Now, obviously, at about halfway up, either your body shifts, but you stall, all right? And if you externally rotate, you can continue without any obstruction. But you're not doing it, though, because you're hitching your shoulder. You're hitching your shoulder. What I'm trying to demonstrate here is, at this point, there's a bony obstruction. So either you have to hitch the shoulder, but definitely if you externally rotate, that obstruction passes, you can go up clean, okay? This comes into play on an upright row. It comes into play on some side raise machines where they position you here and then have you try to lift up. Now, go to the front, put both arms in front. Really palms up, right? Now, from here up, it's pretty clean. Right about here, you start to slow down. You hit a little bit of an obstruction. So now rotate in internal rotation, and you can come up clean again. What happens in the shoulder is when you're in flexion and external rotation, you hit a point of ligament binding. The ligaments in your shoulders twist, and that's what's impeding your movement. Not a fault of your muscle or a fault of your exercises, the ligaments in the shoulder. When you internally rotate, you unbind them and you can come up again. Okay? So think about what this means exercise-wise. It means if you're doing a chin-up with your elbows almost touching or a pull-down, when the weight pulls you up, if you're forcing a full range of motion, your elbows have to flare out. Okay? You can try to go up higher, but the difficulty you're feeling is not you're not improving the muscle, you're just straining those joints. Think about a machine press. If the machine press is too close together, you're lifting, it's getting harder, and you're going to push through it, but you're pushing through the ligaments in your shoulder. Oh. Now, almost everyone, when you did lift your shoulder up, everyone kind of cut between the two planes. They didn't go into pure flexion, they didn't go into pure adduction. Just lift the shoulder up again. Just lift it. Forget everything I said, just lift your shoulder up. That's it. Everyone split the planes in half. Everyone, thanks. Thank you, bud. Everyone went between pure flexion and pure adduction, because this is where the shoulder socket opens up. Okay, the ball and socket of your shoulder joint, it doesn't open up purely this way. It doesn't open up purely this way. It's open somewhere in here. So somewhere in here you have the least amount of obstruction to moving your arm. Again, now think about what this means for exercises. There used to be press behind the neck with a barbell used to be a standard exercise. So you put your arms all the way back here. Well, when you fully abduct like that, you're impinging right at this point of the ball and socket. Same with a pull down behind the neck. All right? When you're forcing your arms as far back as you can, it's not just muscle involved. You're pinching off the joint. Think in terms of triceps exercises. Just recently flipping through the Metrex catalog they send around, they show a free weight workout. They show a guy doing dumbbell triceps extensions. And in the instruction, and this is a month ago, it says, hold your elbows by your ears to isolate your triceps. This is irrelevant to the triceps. The triceps just straighten your elbow out. But what happens is when you do this exercise, sure enough, you move your elbows to your ears, you start to feel more tension here. You're not feeling your triceps working better. You're feeling the strain in your shoulders. Moving overhead is all related to scapulohumeral rhythm. Part of this plane that's not flexion, not abduction, is that this is the angle that the serratus is strongest at. And that comes into play because when you move your arm overhead, up to about 90 degrees is pure shoulder flexion. Okay? Your deltoids contract, your arm moves up. Over 90 degrees, though, your deltoids are in active insufficiency. They can't get shorter. So what happens is the trapezius pulls the top of your scapula, and the serratus pulls the bottom of the scapula to have the effect of turning the entire ball and socket upward. So the ball and socket opens up cleanly up to here, and then to move up further overhead, the whole system has to shift. So that's another reason for that three-quarter plane. That's also why, for instance, there's very little true overhead. Did anybody see the movie Pumping Iron? All right, there's a scene with Lou Ferrigno, and he's pressing, and he's staying right in this short little motion right here. Okay? Well, especially with the amount of muscle he had, that's because true overhead doesn't really exist. That's why in the Olympic weightlifting they get rid of the press, because they'd come up to about here, and then it was unavoidable that they turned it into a bench press, because you really can't, your serratus really isn't strong enough to tilt everything so that you can go completely overhead. Also, look at machine designs, a lot of overhead press designs. They're built at a high incline. They're not built so that you're sitting straight up and pushing straight back behind you. Okay? Look at a Nautilus press, any of the machine design presses, you're at a very steep incline, 70 to 80 degrees. Before we move on, questions about joints and range of motion. Okay, so the last rhetorical question is whether the human machine is designed for speed or for strength. With all the media about how to lift weights, the question might be, should we be lifting weights? Okay, this comes from Everett Harmon, who wrote the Biomechanics chapter in one of the early NSCA textbooks. And right here, this explains ultimately why biomechanics are important. If you have 10 pounds of weight in your hand, the internal forces are dramatically higher because the 10 pounds of weight is acting through a very long lever. Your muscles are acting at very short levers. An old-time leverage diagram and a newer leverage diagram. Rather than tell you about first, second, third class levers, moment arms, everything you need to know about leverage is in the nutcracker. So, conventional nutcracker, right? You have an axis. First of all, here, can you crush that with one hand? No, one hand. Can you just crush it with one hand? I hope not. If you can, don't shake my hand. All right, so what you do is you break out a tool, okay? So you have an axis, and you put the resistance close to the axis, and you hold the business end far away, and with a very, with a very small amount of effort, you apply a lot of force, okay? So this kind of lever applies force. A little bit of force at the ends, a lot of force near the axis. You would never reverse it. You would never put the resistance at the end and try to apply force at the axis. It just doesn't work. You can't generate any force. This kind of lever doesn't leverage force, but what it does, it leverages distance. A little bit of motion at the axis gets a lot of motion at the ends. A little bit of motion at the axis gets a lot of distance at the ends. Human levers, at least for the muscles we're talking about, leverage distance. They don't leverage force. Much more force goes into the motion than comes out, but much less distance goes into the motion. A little bit of motion at the hip, a lot of motion at the foot. So human levers leverage distance, not force. Okay. And since you leverage distance, and since we leverage distance, and speed is distance divided by time, it takes the same amount of time for this little motion to create this big motion. So human skeletons are built to leverage speed. A little bit of distance over here, a lot of distance here in the same time. Technical stuff pertains to laws of the lever. Everything you need to know is with the nutcracker. Again, resistance close to the axis leverages effort. Resistance far away from the axis leverages distance. Okay, so this is a graph of human muscle power, taken from a book called Prime Mover by Stephen Vogel, which is a great text on the history of muscle and how muscle is used. And what this shows is basically that in spite of humans being leveraged for distance, there's a sweet spot of speed and force where you get the most power. So at zero speed, you can exert the most force, which is consistent with the muscle media that says you can hold more than you can lift. All right, you have greater static strength than you have positive strength. At a maximum speed, moving as fast as you can't exert much force at all, which is consistent with those muscle torque curves that showed higher torque curves at faster speeds. But what happens is somewhere in the middle, you'll hit a peak because power is, hold on a second. Power is work divided by time. Work is force times distance. So power is force times distance divided by time. In other words, power is force times speed. So there's a sweet spot of speed where you can get the most power. That's where if you're an athlete, a martial artist, where technique training comes in. Instead of going as fast as you can using brute force or brute speed, there's an optimum speed or optimum amount of force where you get the most power out of your movements. So even though that previous quote about the high internal forces are in play, that doesn't mean don't strength train. It means strength train carefully, because force, which comes from strength training, is part of this equation. So here's ultimately the take-home points from the presentation thus far. Lift with your legs, not your back. It's an old cliche from manual labor, but the structure of the spine suggests it. use an effective range of motion as opposed to a full range of motion. And practically, in terms of your workout, you have to somehow balance a concern for your long-term muscle and joint health with the intensity of the set with the overall workout. You mentioned some other classes before. Well, actually, let me give you a perfect example. Guy comes into my training studio to have his body fat checked, and he is shredded, but he's hunched over. So I say, what happened? He said, well, I was doing a certain class that'll remain nameless, CrossFit, and I threw my back out. I said, gee, man, why'd you do that? I said, the exercise selection can be kind of dubious, and then you get caught up in the competition, your form turns to crap, and that's how you get hurt. He says, well, thanks for telling me now after I get hurt. So I say, well, after your back heals, train with me. I'll train you as hard as you worked out there, and I guarantee you won't get hurt. And he says, well, thanks, man, but I really like the class. He says, thanks, man, but I really like the class. Look how well it worked. So now here's a guy who knew exactly when he got hurt, knew what he was doing when he got hurt, knew what to do not to get hurt, and he didn't care. Now for me as a trainer, that's not my call to make for the clients. I can't really tell a client, okay, do this exercise, even though I know it might hurt you in the future. That's really not my decision. And for myself at 52 years old, I do nothing in my workouts that isn't congruent with biomechanics. And outside of my workouts, whether it's skating or jiu-jitsu or shoveling snow, I'm very aware of how I move. As for you guys, you've been warned. 20 years from now, you rupture a bicep, don't come running to me. I warned you now. So, all right, so any questions on the material in general or the videos or the manual? Yes, sir. What's your name?
David.
Hi, David.
So this is all very interesting concepts, very contrary to obviously a lot of popular belief. So what you're getting at biomechanically as far as the back goes and squatting and such, the back is not designed to bear heavy weight, like from the upper part of the torso?
Again, not just because I say so. If you look at any anatomy diagram of the back, if you look at the layers of muscles, you look at the organization of the bones, it's pretty clearly a pyramid. Big blocks on the bottom, smaller blocks towards the top. If you look at the muscle organization, a lot of small muscles layered on top of each other, many different joints compared to below the waist, where you have big blocks of bone and big muscles. So, not to issue a blanket statement, but I think when you look at the bone, when you look at the bones and the muscles involved with the spine, loading a weight up on your neck doesn't seem to match that too well.
Just one more quick question. So, how would you, what would you say about the deadlift, following that similar type of logic?
Well, I think the deadlift is probably, let's assume perfect form, just to minimize the amount of variables. All right. If you assume perfect form, the deadlift is probably closer because the weight isn't. You're not taking a pyramid and trying to ask it to support a top-heavy structure. Assuming perfect form, and by perfect form I mean you're strong enough to maintain the lumbar curves through the deadlift. You're not hitching. You're not releasing your scapula. If you assume perfect form, deadlift, trap bar deadlifts, hip belt squats, there's a lot of ways of loading your legs without inverting the pyramid. What's your name?
Simon. I'm just a little bit uncertain about when you say do limited range of motion. Can you give us a demonstration of a bicep curl or something just to see how limited, or what do you mean by that exactly?
Yeah. Okay. By the way, I'm not saying limited. I'm just suggesting not to use an excessive range of motion. So, if you're standing, as a matter of fact, there's a video on this. There's a video on this on YouTube, moment arm exercise biceps, which goes into much more. But what you would want to do is just don't instead of going from the weight hanging straight down, where you have zero you have no lever created by the weight, okay? Instead of going from here to here, where you're moving from no resistance lever, again to no resistance lever, so you go from no work, a lot of work, no work. You would stay somewhere just short of locking out through the sticking point, and again, keep your elbows by your side so that you still have some lever created here, as opposed to letting the elbows come forward to make it zero work. In general, with exercises, if you're used to doing an extreme range of motion, if you just tighten it up a little bit, you'll notice that the weight you handle goes up, which should be kind of a clue. In specific, you really have to look at every muscle and joint, which is the reason for the videos and for this manual and for the next manual I'm working on, which is to specifically say, for this joint, train this way. Yes, sir?
I actually have two quick questions. The first one is, for my discipline, I do a lot of explosive movements. And what are your thoughts on making that more safe?
Well, what's a martial art?
No, I do parkour, so a lot of like popping up and kind of...
Well, you know what? In general, if you're doing a sport or an activity, you accept the risks that go with it. So while you're doing that, you're accepting the risk. I think you don't add to your exposure by then walking into the weight room and popping up with weights. I think what you do is, I think you train your muscles appropriately in the weight room, and then when you go do your sport, you accept the risks of the sport and you do what's appropriate there. Obviously, if you just trained isometrically for that, when you actually went on the parkour course, it would be a little, whether it transfers over or not would be kind of questionable. But again, any athlete, you step on the field, you accept the risks of what's there. My contention just is, don't add to that also in the weight room. Next question.
And
Next.
Yeah, and my second question is, I know a lot of trainers and people talk about doing like compound heavy exercises such as a barbell squat or like a bench press. And I think what you're talking about is more of like isolating the muscles. So what are your feelings on heavy compound exercises?
You know what my feelings are is that it's really not as simple as saying just do compound exercises, just do isolation exercises. I mean, moment arm exercise, most of the exercises demonstrated in there are compound exercises, because the compound exercise, it's how you do them how you do them is more important than what the exercise is. And the compound exercise with a couple of tweaks can match the difficulty of the exercise with the torque of the muscles. And again, if you tweak the ends of the range of motion, you may not jeopardize the joints. So it's really not as simple as saying free weights or machines, single joint versus compound. They're all fair game. What really matters is what's happening with your body while you're doing them. Okay, you go next.
Just wanted to ask about using your own body weight, doing push-ups, pull-ups, any kind of non-machine workouts.
Yep.
Are there any big obstacles or pitfalls as far as, using your muscles in the wrong way on those type exercises?
Yes, because again, it's not the exercise, it's what you do. For instance, a couple of weeks ago, I put up a video on chin-ups. Okay, when you're doing a chin-up, that overhead position, this is more detail on the video, but the overhead position is, I suggest people stay away from it. Keep your shoulders away from your ears, okay? And you're on the bar, keep your shoulders away from your ears and lean back to start, and then go into the chin-up. Because when you bounce out of the bottom or you let your shoulders come up on your ear, it's just a lot of stress on your rotator cuff. Some explanations are better in video or in print, but the short story would be the watch bouncing out of the bottom on the chin-up. because you're not doing anything positive for the muscles. You're just bouncing off. If you have a close grip, for instance, you're just bouncing off that ligament binding. As far as push-ups go, push-ups are generally safe until you try to make them harder. And then people put them between benches and try to get extra range of motion to make them harder, or do them explosively to make them harder. Not to sell anything, but with push-ups, there's a device that puts elastic cables across your back, and that allows you to make the push-up harder while staying within a safe range of motion. But again, it's not a question of body weight versus machines versus dumbbells and barbells. It's what you're doing with the body that matters. Before you go, how have you been making those exercises harder?
I've done some push-ups like where you do your feet on a bench, so you're kind of on a decline.
Yeah, okay.
And just that's about it.
Yeah, you run out of ways of making push-ups harder. I'm not a tremendous fan of elastic resistance because it only gets harder. And as we saw with the muscle torque curves, that's not necessarily how muscle functions. But in the case of the push-up, it is a way of making push-ups more challenging without, going up on blocks or you don't want to make any exercise more challenging because it's straining your joint. You want to make it more challenging for the muscle.
Thanks.
You got to run, bud.
My question is it better for muscle and joint health to use ranges of motion that are more linear, for example, a Smith machine rather than just a barbell?
Well, that's a good question. The Smith machine, I'll tell people to use a Smith machine mainly for the bottom stops. A number of years ago, early 2000s, club industry reported on a guy squatting in the Smith machine, no bottom stops, loads up the bar, breaks the lock in his knees. I got it, I don't got it. Bar literally crushed his spine, ended up quadriplegic. Okay? Big part of the case had to do with why the machine didn't have bottom stops. And the people defending the manufacturer in the health clubs said, well, we looked around health clubs, no one uses the bottom stops. And a hard stop, like 20 inches off the floor, is sufficient. And the plaintiff's attorney, the guy who was injured's attorney, said, no, our research says 24 inches off the floor is a minimum. Either one is ridiculous. You're not getting out of 24 inches off the floor. So the Smith machine might be a little unnatural as far as finding the grooves, but if you use the bottom stops and don't rely on the little hook, it's far safer. So you got to make that call. Again, for me personally, at 52 years old, dealing with clients, I'm not going to risk, missing a spot on a barbell squat or missing a squat on a bench press for the sake of nth degree of improvement to the exercise. Unfortunately, barbells. Last year, Stefan Johnson, college football player, being spotted in a college weight room, misses the lift, bar crashes on his jaw and throat, almost dies, hours of surgery to repair. The year before that, football player Artrell Woods doing barbell step-ups, twists an ankle, bar obviously falls, damages his spine. The club industry case, the guy I mentioned in the beginning, getting choked by the barbell. I know there are a lot of very pro barbell guys out there who attribute all sorts of magic to using the barbell, but the perspective of the magic benefit versus safety, especially with stuff like that, with your spine and your jaw and your face, Again, other people will disagree with me, and they want a completely natural motion, and that's fine. Obviously, it's fine as long as you can avoid the catastrophic injury. So the next thing I'm working on to make this material a little more accessible is a manual called, and videos called Congruent Exercise. So in it, I talk about much of what I talked about today, just with more specific context. So speaking of avoiding tragic accidents, that's the first thing we talk about is biomechanics involved in squatting and barbell bench pressing. Then we talk about full range of motion, length tension, which we did, functional training, some of the comments I made today about the leg press and the squat, along with other things. The idea of muscle shaping, which is probably more of a bodybuilding concern or a fitness magazine concern than an athlete's concern. But a lot of times, and I break this down, the sensation you're getting during the exercise isn't some magic benefit you're giving to the muscle. You're just feeling joint strain, such as in the shoulder. And then the speed versus strength discussion. And then, of course, people want to know, well, okay, what does that mean in the real world? So these are pretty much exercises that you can do either home or in a gym. I have some machine exercises, some gym exercises, and some that work well at home. It answers the question is, what does this look like? I go to the gym, and now what do I do? So these leg exercises, some chest and back, more back, back and shoulders, and then arms and midsection. Getting back to earlier, somebody asked a question about spine exercises. These bottom four are, technically core exercises. And absent somebody training for a competition, like a powerlifting competition where you have to lift weights for your back, if you're just interested in spine and joint health, those seem to be the safest things to do that are also effective. And for more information, that's the manual I'm talking about, which should be available by the end of the summer. Moment arm exercise is something I wrote a number of years ago, and then currently on YouTube, there's a series of videos demonstrating a lot of what we're talking about today. Anybody else with any questions? And there's a few minutes later, so if you have anything specific you want to ask me, please feel free.
I got a quick question.
Go ahead.
Not to put you on the spot, but do you have any comments on the safety, effectiveness, and efficiency of the fitness craze known as P90X?
Well, yeah, let's lump that in with CrossFit and other classes. Going back a few slides, things like P90X, CrossFit, any kind of fitness class, they're living right here. Okay, they're living with, at the end of the workout, the person's a puddle of sweat, their tongue's hanging out, they're exhausted. How they get there seems to be a lot less of a concern, because I know with the particular one you mentioned, for instance, there's a number of dubious exercises in there, whether it's upright rows or behind the neck stuff, plyometrics. Plyometrics might be appropriate for athletes, but this is clearly not marketed to athletes. So while I appreciate the sense of physical accomplishment that goes into doing that class and getting through it, you would like to not have it bite you in the ass 20 years from now. So that's why, for someone who likes that kind of challenge, I would moderate those exercises and tweak them so that they're not just beating up on the joints. Again, for me personally and for the clients I train, this is the order I go in. First, I make sure they're doing appropriate exercises that are safe and they're doing them the right way without any twitches or without any squirming. Once they get that down, then we make each set progressively harder. And then, if it's appropriate, then I'll cut the rest down in between their sets. Or, if they simply prefer not to train that way, we'll do something else for the overall metabolic challenge. So, if somebody wants to lift weights with long rests in between, and then hike, run, bike, skate, row, swim, whatever their, parkour, whatever their preference is, it's okay to do separate things. You don't have to do it all in the same DVD series. All right, anybody else? And if you want to come up to me one-to-one, that's fine too.
All right. Thank you, Bill.
Can I have enough?